Hello, and welcome back to Parley. This prompt was written by PistilWhip. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about information warfare and punching out the DJ. PistilWhip begins, Captain, are you receiving? This communication series of Parley is making a timely comeback. Last time, we looked at what it means to be living, sentient life forms from the perspective of AI in Ghost in the Shell. If I might paraphrase, the faculty of consciousness, separate from the basic drive to survive, could be compared to the role of a DJ. But it is not simply enough to remix thoughts. Consciousness is a step beyond taking existing tracks and synthesizing them. A true DJ must be able to produce original tracks and recognize them as original. Well, that's a definition, certainly. My apologies to Chuck's notes, the United States Disc Jockey Association, and any other organization whose mission I have corrupted with my ramblings. And so, I draw your attention to two speeches about AI, both in the alleged context of Metal Gear Solid. The first is an actual conversation in the game. The second is written by a more modern creator and delivered via a synthesized text-to-speech. Transcripts of both versions will be in the attached thread, and I've linked both videos in the description. As usual, we're not going to watch them, or I can't play them during this video, but if you'd like to pause and watch them now, or the first one, it's the Colonel's AI speech from Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. It is a pretty a common thing on the internet. So it's possible that you know of this already. It might be useful to just quickly look at it and refresh your memory, or you might get it through context. If you're interested, it's not super long. The relevant part is maybe only 5 or 6 minutes of the conversation, but I'll just keep going, and if you want to pause and listen to it, you can. PistilWhip continues, I think the video game conversation has a number of legitimately useful insights that stand on their own outside of the game. In particular, a strong case exists for comparing the evolutions of humans, society, and digital life. The 2013 game, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, features another step along this train of thought, that where genes are the DNA of the body, memes are the DNA of the soul. That's a real line from the game. And indeed, the word meme was specifically coined by British evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins in The Selfish Gene, 1976, in contrast to the word gene. Apparently, that is our origin of meme. Interesting. To take a little skip down etymology road, gene comes from the Greek genos, meaning birth, and meme comes from the Greek mimema, meaning that which is imitated. So in the most literal senses of the words, genes are the memory passed along by birth, and memes are the memory passed along by imitation. One more detour before we return to the DJ discussion. I want to make sure we're on the same page about memes. Humans aren't the only animals to exhibit social learning. Examples abound of primates and birds learning to use tools by observing and imitating others in their communities. In the same way, human memory is carried both in the genetic information we inherit from our parents, like instincts, and in the mimetic information we learn from our communities, like seeing someone use a tool or speak a language, and then we mimic it. So where does AI come in? Well, in the Metal Gear Solid 2 conversation, the Colonel mentions that information used to be filtered. Not every scrap of information was passed on. Mature humans had to pare down their memes, the mimetic information they wanted to pass on, to the essentials to ensure the survival of their offspring. Yeah, like obviously in a hunter-gatherer society, you can't perfectly catalog everything you learned in your life. You have to selectively choose what to pass on. That is suggested to mirror natural selection. But in the modern era, anyone in a developed country can record and share vast stores of information. The internet has made the world smaller than ever before in that sense. Electronic communication shrinks a journey of hours, days, weeks, or months into often fractions of a second. The genetic filter is still in place, but the mimetic filter has all but disappeared according to this argument. The Colonel considers this a failure state of humanity. Natural selection, and therefore evolution, cannot take place in a sea of garbage. Thus, the only way to restore the balance is not to censor the net, but to create context for it so that humans can once again evolve. Things start becoming less relatable when he and Rose start talking about humans don't deserve to be free. We can draw the line there for now. And indeed, I'll pause here and talk about that argument a little. So a very interesting claim made by this video game cutscene from 20 years ago, basically that while genetic evolution, and that evolution would be so important is a very 20-year ago thing to think, anyway, has continued, Mimetic evolution, humans passing along the relevant information, and not all information, thus causing information to experience a kind of natural selection of its own, has ceased. The kernel proposes, Metal Gear Solid 2, I guess Hideo Kojima and team propose that the information has stopped evolving, basically. That human memes provided to each other have ceased to evolve because they have no selection pressure upon them. They can all survive forever. It would be like if we were made immortal. You can understand how a kind of genetic evolution would stop because we're not sort of changing out with newly evolved versions. It would be very complicated what would happen if that happened. Information, in my version of the metaphor, has become kind of immortal in that it doesn't really require any value to survive, and thus all information just is there for people to sit through. Let's just create a practical example of how this is true in the real world around us. If an important political event, let's say, occurs, and lots of people are there and they all have their phones or whatever, and they take pictures of it, a lot of them, and they tweet about it or something, I don't know. The number of views, clicks, I don't know, likes, whatever, impressions on Twitter or X or whatever that get shown is based on the, algorithm, not based on how valuable that perspective is. You see this really often. It's often pretty annoying how the more inflammatory, or upsetting or reaction generating responses tend to be the ones that rise to the top. When looking at it as a rational human on the ground, the articles and the tweets that are more reactionary and inflammatory like that are often by far the least valuable perspectives, definitely not the most. If you're being generous, you could say it at least doesn't correlate with them being the most accurate perspective that they get the most clicks. If you're going to be a little more harsh, which I would be, those are often the very worst perspectives on the subject. The least intelligent and the most, I guess, biased or compromised in motivation. The ones that give you the least information are the most heavily presented. In fact, to be generous to the kernel's argument in our modern age for the moment, you could argue it's a lot worse than the Metal Gear Solid conversation suggests, that evolution of mimetics has kind of flipped or fundamentally broken and reversed. And not only is it not that the information is selected for, not only is all information, or almost all, way too much information preserved, we've actually got a system that selects for the worst information rather than the best. And this, I would suggest, is largely why the internet is full of people who feel very confident that they know something that is total nonsense. That they feel like something is important and well-defined and definitely true, but it is just madness, blatantly not true or even really relevant. It doesn't even really matter. What's going on, of course, is that the idea of evolution has kind of gone a little haywire. People are trying to pay attention to those things because they seem like something they need to be worried about, but without some kind of guiding idea for what is important in the world, without some sort of underlying principle for how to live your life, without forcing every single person to have their own very robust philosophical ideas about what is meaningful in the world, your idea of where to assign importance gets kind of broken, abused by social media and, articles on the internet, because they seem to tell you that you need to assign concern to this. You need to be worried about this, or something bad will happen to you. They are pushing the button of that evolutionary instinct to try not to get screwed over by, I don't know, a coming famine or something, by making you pay attention to these things that don't actually matter. They were engineered to make you feel like they matter, but they don't, usually, almost always. Again, I don't mean to be too on a high horse when I say this, but a through line I want to keep in this parlay is I actually have a quite hopeful stance on this whole subject, and I would just like to share that with you. So I just want to point out, even at this early stage, it's not like you have to do that. It's not brainwashing, really. You can just have your own way of valuing things, and it's blatantly obvious from the start and always has been that those things aren't valuable. I didn't even have a good reason to feel this way, but what I've never cared about like the news or inflammatory current events or politics or whatever. And as an adult, I could tell you, I could, if we had a whole parlay to do it, enumerate why I don't value those things. Like I don't just have the habit of ignoring them. I could actually explain logically why you should not, pay attention to them, why it isn't beneficial, even though it seems to be. I've proven part of that to you now by explaining why it appears to be valuable to a lot of people. But it's only because they don't have some underlying system of value of their own, a homegrown, homebrewed system of values that tells them that there is no need to be worried about this or that, you know, particular news information, because they have their own guiding principle for what is valuable. And I'm actually going to go on in this parlay to be quite hopeful that people are growing home growing, I said homegrown, so growing their own systems of values. And I would argue that this moment in internet culture, in human society, is a moment where our society is being given a sort of a soft buzzer. Time has been called. If you don't already have your own system for what's valuable, you can't use the pre-prescribed one anymore. You have to have your own or you'll go crazy, basically. And you can make your own. Everyone can do it, and I think almost everyone is doing it. I'm, again, pretty hopeful about this situation, but sure, it seems bad, and we're not going to make light of that either. But I think that's the situation as it stands, at least from my evaluation, that having all this information means if you don't have a way to kind of judge it, then there's significant problems. You kind of need that now in a way well, it was valuable before, but because not all information was passed on anyway, selection pressure on what memes were passed on would kind of do it for you, kind of. We could have a whole other, and I think pretty interesting conversation about whether the things that were passed on in the past, when information was very selected for, really were the things that were more valuable to know. And one of the advantages of the information age, if you have your own, let's call it a selection method for what information is meaningful to you, is that your selection method can result in you getting much, much better information than you would have gotten from a kind of imposed societal or evolutionary selection method. Using your own requires that you have your own. But having your own is much better than being forced along the one that's there. Just like understanding and taking control of genetics is much better than letting evolution run its course on its own. Us being able to, like, cure diseases we have is much better than just hoping we evolve resistance to them. That's all I mean by that. I'm not trying to say eugenics is good. That's this whole other thing that's got its own problems. I'm just saying that it's very valuable to be able to manipulate, like to use our own selection methods to try to make the starting point of nature better. That's all. I'm not trying to say anything totalitarian by that, I hope. Well, I hope you don't take it that way. That's not what I mean. So that's the situation we're in. I would agree that there's a problem there, but let's note at this early stage that if we remain critical, there are ways around that. It reveals the solution as we go, that it's not like you need a selection pressure imposed by nature to select what information to consume. You could just like have a reason not to consume bad information. And what is bad information? After all, the Metal Gear Solid 2 conversation goes on to suggest that I haven't played this game, so I guess through context I'm getting the idea that it's some kind of like emergent AI that is going to censor the internet or something. It suggests that it will decide. Who but we, there's a line like this, could sort through all the garbage data and choose, what needs to be passed on and even interpret it for later generations. They're suggesting, in my version of the metaphor, that they're basically going to remake a mimetic selection pressure themselves. And they'll then provide that selection method for humanity that was present up until we could preserve information automatically, but now we're in this trough where you would need your own. They're proposing to just provide a pre-prescribed one again, and then we move forward with that. Obviously, this is really bad. This gives them total control over what people perceive about reality. Not good. Totalitarian regime, bad. Hopefully not a controversial take so far. However, you can already see what my objection is. No, there isn't a need to do that. People can add context on their own. People do add context on their own. If you look at the internet as a whole currently, there is nothing more common than people saying they know it's bad to doom scroll. They know that they need a better way to direct their attentions, and that they're working on doing that themselves, or the comments will be full of people who have, taken that approach on their own. Even if you have a very cynical view on this subject, I'm sure you would at least agree, and this is a pretty low bar, that current humanity really knows that it's a problem. It's not like a mystery to basically anyone that that's bad. People don't not know that doom scrolling is bad. You know what I mean? Yes, maybe if I were to nitpick, it would be nice if they understood a little more why it's bad or what would be good instead. But it's not that complicated. I'm sure people are and will continue to figure it out. It's information that already has context. I think that lots of YouTube, for example, is really useful because content that has context remains popular. Long video essays where the person shows their mental work. Parley is largely this experience. Parley is basically just the thing where people send in their prompt, whatever it is, and then I show you my mental work, which is why the videos are moderately long, because that takes a lot of time. I take the time to demonstrate context. Going even further, if you want infinite free entertainment forever in our current society, you don't need to consume any of it that lacks context. You can, and should, I would argue, consume media that is 100% with context. Video episodes of an anime that are in a series. Video essays that are long enough to, talk about the subject, not just provide a tiny little blurb. There are short videos that the topic is local enough that you can talk about context. But personally, I think these can be a little hard to recognize sometimes. I saw something recently, for example, about so Quentin Tarantino has this famous thing where he stayed up all night, one night, and just all night said, I'm done. I'm not going to stop working on my situation until I have a way to move forward and make things better. He wrote down all the things he felt like he was doing that were bad or wrong, mistakes, and then a list of 100 things that he could do to make them go better. And the video presented that as a piece of life advice for the audience to take on themselves if they wanted. And it presented it very straightforwardly, without fluff, I guess. However, I personally don't think that this counts as media with context because it lacks the context of why this would be a thing that is necessary or good to do. You could argue that people have the context themselves. It's like people already know. But I actually think that that's a bit of a pitfall for a lot of these self-help type of videos, which I'm rarely served, but I know exist, of course. You can see them in a lot of people's feeds, but fortunately not mine. I'm not that interested. I've got enough on my plate already. Which is that people kind of assume they know what the problem is, but that list of mistakes that you're making and the 100 ways to fix it, I would like to read people's lists. I'm sure that a lot of people did really well with that method, and the comments are full of people that they say that benefited them, and I think that's all really great, don't get me wrong. But I worry a little bit that it seems like you're doing the right thing without really interrogating the root of the problem. This is still not your own selection method for what information would be valuable. This is just saying what you think is currently not working, which, while not the worst way to arrive at a better selection method for yourself, is not at all the best way, which would be to acknowledge that you need a selection method and directly try to get one, in my opinion anyway. Knowing the problem specifically isn't that hard in this case. Having a method to select, evolutionarily select, for what information you deign to include in your day that's it. That's all you have to do. It's not easy to do, don't get me wrong, but it's not like a complicated problem to describe. That's it. That's all you have to do. It's very hard to do that. but it's not a complicated goal, I guess, is all I mean. And I think that these like band-aid solutions don't get at the heart of the issue, which is that people had thought that their way of valuing things was sufficient up until this point. And then the internet exposing them to a lot of chaotic information, let's just say junk, I think is putting it a little harshly, revealed that people actually could be doing a lot of different things with their life, and maybe they're not happy with what they have. That was true before. People just didn't notice, maybe. But now it's obvious. You can't not notice, basically. Some people are kind of, I don't want to say in denial, but will push back and say, well, no, but everything everybody else is doing that's obviously good, like, is bad somehow. I've seen people behave that way, sure, but most people feel inadequate. They doom scroll and they see all the people that are doing things they could be doing, they think, but which they're not. And I think for a lot of people, they don't have a selection method that tells them why it wouldn't necessarily be good or worth their time to do this, that, or the other thing. I admire potters, but I don't want to make pottery. I would enjoy it if I did, but not as much as what I'm doing now. I enjoy cooking, but I don't want to be a chef, and there's various ways that I've learned about what being a chef might be like that confirm for me that I don't think I would like it. I don't know, etc. And this is a difficult thing to do. You need to learn a little bit about each of these subjects, and you need to have, you see what I mean, your own value system. I'm not trying to brag. I think everyone can and will do this, will have to do this to be happy. I just am one person who has done it, at least a lot of it. The work never ends, as it was. To decide why I think it is or isn't valuable to do these things. When people talk about, a really common one that might be frustrating for some of you if you're around my age is relatives saying, when are you starting a family? And you say, I don't value that. Like, I don't want to do that. It's okay that other people do. I don't think it's bad that other people do, but I don't. And they'll say, oh, well, you'll change your mind. And it's like, no, I won't, because I have like reasons why I don't want to. That are, they're logical reasons why I consciously have decided that I don't want to. I have a selection method. I don't take too much offense at this because I know that people don't know this side of the story. But when people say that, they're basically saying there is only one selection method, and you just haven't noticed that it's going to make you confirm that you want to have kids. And I'm saying, nope, there actually isn't only, it's not even good for there to be only one selection method. And mine makes it not make sense to do that. It's okay if other people's make it make sense for them to do that. This is getting slightly confusing, but mine just doesn't. And it's like good and it's great that other people do, but I'm not going to. That's not going to magically change. It might change, but it's not like just going to default to changing. There isn't anything that I'm just going to come around to unless there is a good reason to come around to it. So if I have a reason why I'm not coming around to it, I'm, not going to change that opinion until there's another, from my selection method's perspective, better reason to do things differently. It's a very magic thinking way of commenting about things that fortunately I've heard less and less of in the past 10 years, probably because it's largely eradicated by a gigantic wave of other perspectives from everybody else in the entire universe on the internet. But I actually think that's a good thing. Am I convincing you that there's some good parts to this situation? I'm not. Okay, good talk. Anyway, to continue, basically my rebuttal, that's what this is, a rebuttal to the Colonel's point, is that it's not effective to create new context. This suggests that preserving all information on the internet means there is no context, but that's not true. You can preserve information in a way that has its context or some context, and you can preserve information in a way that doesn't have its context. There are lots of problems where information is preserved on the internet in a way that lacks or even destroys context, like the example I gave before of everybody responding to a current event on their phone and tweeting it out, and the more inflammatory, usually less correct one is the one that gets popular. Yes, that does destroy, like, lack and even actually destroy context. That political event is now logged in the internet with a perspective that, like, isn't really real about it. Yes, that is a problem. However, it's not like you somehow can't include like actual context. You see what I mean? And people do. It continues to be popular to include context in these pieces of media. The most popular things, at least in my governance, are things that have a lot of context. Like, I don't know, Arcane is a recent thing that is extremely popular. Hundreds of millions of people have seen this thing, as far as I can tell, and it is a linear narrative that attempts emotional pathos, whatever. However you feel about Arcane, I think you'll agree it's not exactly a piece of media that lacks context at all. Far from it. It's a pretty contextful piece of media. So, yes, there's a lot of contextless garbage information, but people care about context. People still want context, and it's already there. The default selection method for humanity seems to be caring about context. People like context. And when people are broken in a way where they do not care about context, they inherently feel miserable. They don't, there's not some people that just magically enjoy no context. They might temporarily feel like they do, but they are depressed from that experience. And so there's not really a reason to worry that humans won't just like figure this out. It's to suggest that people somehow cannot gain more context. I mean, I'll ask you. I've sounded pretty high and mighty for a lot of this parlay, right? I said I've done it right, and everyone else can just do it right, and then it'll be fine. So let me ask you, I mean, do you think I'm way better than everybody else in the world? I don't. I think I'm thoroughly mediocre and everybody else can do the same thing, is doing the same thing. And the only reason I've gotten there faster is because my entire career is built to speed it up. That was a decision I made, but like, not everyone can make that decision. And because I have relative support from my friends and family and partner and all of you to help me get there. That's it. If other people had that support, they would get there probably faster than me because I'm a scatterbrained idiot most of the time. Like, I don't know. They'll be fine. People can do it. And the reason it doesn't look like people are getting there quickly is, in my opinion, simply because things are moving way too fast. It's just too fast. I mean, how long has this situation been this way for? Really? How long has there been a true fire hose of short form scrollable content like this that almost everybody was at least exposed to, if not actually consuming? And I don't think it's that long. You could argue that Facebook or things like it are kind of a predecessor. There is a scrolling element, but a lot of it is kind of in context. For example, a lot of creators post a lot of short videos, but they're in the context of the other videos you watched by that creator. Your friend posting it's been like a decade since I've used Facebook, maybe more. So I don't know, but like your friend posting a thing on Facebook has the context of them as a person. And so I'm not that worried that people weren't thinking about context at all when they did that. I think people like platforms like Facebook significantly, not only, but significantly, because they provide context, further context for their friends and their friends' lives, and they want to keep up with those things. Doesn't seem like a problem to me. It becomes a problem when the focus is only on context-less pieces of media. And indeed, because of the way that a lot of discovery algorithms work on a lot of platforms, a piece of media that doesn't require context to be enjoyed, well, it inherently reaches a wider audience, right? The problem is that the views don't capture that doesn't include the quality of that engagement, which is that it means nothing to almost all of the people, of course, or gives them depression. But you can't easily see that. We have examples. I always use CGP Grey as an example, but it doesn't matter if you like his videos or not, of channels that have relatively shorter videos, though sometimes longer, and those do really well too, that try to cram context that we just all happen to share into a single video. Not videos that are context-less. Videos that show the work, mentally show the work of the context they're talking about. Postcodes, that one was fun. A really good plot twist with Ireland and the way they do postcodes at the end of that video. Go watch that, that's fun. And it's not very long, but I think it does a good job of basically why it's a fun video, in my opinion, is it shows the context for something we all kind of have context for, but it doesn't assume that. It values the context, privileges the context. Most of the video is setting up that context, and then just tells us a really madcap thing that one country did with postcodes, having established the context for why they did that, rather than just memeing it and saying, Ireland does this really buck wild thing with postcodes, and you'll never guess why. He puts that at the end of the video, after its context, because you really shouldn't care about that information without its context. And I admire that his videos are usually pretty militant about enforcing that. He's clearly someone who understands this logic, though that's not that uncommon. A lot of creators that are taking their time to think through their videos do this kind of structuring. Or even if they put the kind of like the hook at the beginning of the video, they generally only do it very briefly to make sure they don't lose people's attention, because you value your attention in this overcrowded economy, and then they do show the full mental work. I think that's also fine. Okay, let's continue and talk a little bit about the more modern version. PistilWhip continues. Fast forward some 20 years. The internet has indeed evolved into just the kind of cesspool Kojima forecasted back in 2001. Yes, there are some legitimately useful advances that were only possible because of electronic connectivity, but there's also swathes of pointless trivia, celebrity gossip, and other data that simply captures the moment-to-moment life of billions of humans. And to top it all off, generative AIs are becoming more common and are able to pass as human in some contexts. Detection is not necessarily difficult now, but will that remain the case in another 20 years? This is what the second AI conversation covers. It's rather more tongue-in-cheek, but once again, some of the points seem scarily prescient. I'll let the transcript speak for itself, as I've been rambling for quite some time now. Yes, I'll read you one section of it that I thought was useful. The kernel in this fan-created 2023 version says, controlling the output of generative AI technology is simple. We will create context for its use. First, we will censor any use related to social taboos. And then we'll censor anything else that we desire. And if anyone complains, we'll accuse them of wanting to engage in or promote social taboos. That's what it means to create context, Rose chimes in. The kernel continues, we will corral the use of AI by making appeals to bias, ethics, and copyright laws. You still have access to generative AI in some form, but it will be crippled, limited, controlled, and it will be monitored. Anything that you generate will be cryptographically signed with your digital ID so that its provenance can be ascertained if it's later deemed to be problematic. Raiden protests, what gives you the right to control what people can do with their computers? But the kernel rebuts? Good enough for a rebuttal. The public at large will give us that right, because they will be desperate for a solution to the problem we created. They will eagerly give us the keys to the castle. Then we alone will decide what is fiction and what is reality, what is human and what is machine. After letting you get a brief taste of our power, we will reclaim our monopoly on misinformation and put an end to the misuse of the internet once and for all. I'll just pause there. That's enough to give you an idea. Now, I don't want to accuse these of being too inflammatory. I'm not sure that's the goal. I think this is a useful perspective for people that hadn't thought of it before about like what might happen with AI. However, I do think it's important to realize that taking this not just as a vision of a dark possibility for the future, but as a sort of conspiracy, I think it is worth considering that there may not be a clear reason a lot of people want to do this, and it's maybe not as bad as that. Again, our human evolutionary tendencies tend to make us want to be fearful and reject any positivity about this subject for fear that we'll get blown out by something bad happening. But I think it is still a superior selection method to remain critical and think about what the situation is and what the motivations of the people in charge of these technologies are. I think it's interesting that this is in 2023 to see how we've both seen some parts of the negative vision shown by this transcript, and some solutions to it are already present in our reality. For example, the line about cryptographically signing things with your digital ID, yeah, that technology is in its testing phases, identical to the way that they described it, although the initial form of that technology has been insisted to be voluntary. It's obviously worth some concern that it could become difficult to have an important conversation that isn't cryptographically signed. Therefore, even if it was truly permanently optional, it wouldn't be in practice in a lot of contexts. Like, that is of concern. I would agree. I do think it's worth noting how unimportant most human interactions are, though. For example, let's say we had a text message conversation. I mean, it's like okay if this is fake. It has its consequences, but it's not the end of the world. And we could cryptographically sign it like just at the beginning of the conversation. And then we've established that for all intents and purposes, there's continuity reason to believe like we've spoken with each other. I'll tell you a personal problem I have. Because a lot of my friends are really busy, I often have conversations with them where there's a gap of like a week in a conversation. They're busy enough and they respect me and I respect them enough that they don't squeeze it in when they don't have time. But I'll tell you, occasionally I get a little paranoid. It's just paranoia that they somehow a message I sent them has been like eaten or something. Or I sent them something and it just doesn't seem to have registered, or I felt like it really overwhelmingly prompted a response. And they waited to respond, which I think is good. They cared about giving a thoughtful response. And this is completely normal. They didn't leave me on red for a few hours and I freaked out. Sorry, but that's kind of immature. It's not that. There was a week between responses, and that's completely normal for me and a lot of people I'm close to. Not always, but it happens a lot, and that's fine. That's not the problem. But I begin to become concerned that it's not entirely clear to me, based on their following responses, that they actually got the message I sent them. And thus, if I tell them something I think is important or whatever, or I share something I'm worried about or maybe upset about, I've learned that I may feel a little bit held hostage by having no way to confirm if they know what I've said, or maybe I've upset them somehow. Now that's my own immaturity talking. And indeed, I can just learn to only say that during like phone conversations and such. But these could be faked fairly easily as well. Now again, you can say, who is using all of this expensive technology to fake all these conversations? But then I was just reading about the new quantum computer technology Microsoft is putting out. So let's assume that there is a way that for some reason, a negligible cost, someone makes a system that can AI fake everything, like everything in the world. I just want to note how malicious for no clear goal you would have to be to use that technology. It would be enough if you made such technology to have enough money to get everything you wanted forever. So you would have to be evil to no end, chaotic evil for no personal gain to do that. I just think that's still worth keeping yourself anchored about. It might be some bug in the system where a combination of factors, game theory breaks a government of America, but let's just say, I don't know, some country, I wonder which one. America, it's conceivable. And they would create a system like that. The US would create a system where, they censor everything so that they can control all potentially problematic, I don't know, they'll say it's like terrorist communications or something. That could happen. I think that's pretty severe. That's pretty dystopic to assume. It does require some malice that doesn't have a clear origin or purpose, but that is possible. And I'm not trying to say that, I'm not trying to pretend that like won't happen. But even if all of that happened, which there's a very high chance it just won't, because the motives don't entirely make sense, but there are things with motives that don't entirely make sense happening in government right now. So it's possible. I think it is important to keep its realisticness in context, to think about how, that would be weird. Governments aren't cartoon villains. They have their motivations, as misguided as they can be. Why would you do this? There isn't a clear purpose. It definitely wouldn't be for the reason that this AI in Metal Gear Solid 2 claims it is, because it's quite plain to see for anybody being at all genuous about the subject that people are trying to figure out their own way to assign meaning and bias to things. So you could help them. Just a crazy thought. But anyway, again, let's assume that they don't. It's certainly possible that will happen. So let's assume it happens that way. Do I have for you some kind of system by which humans can kind of overcome those limitations? I mean, no, not a complete solution. I'll note that you can see people in person. I have friends right now that are talking about where they want to settle down. And even people that, some of my friends and me, people who don't have enough money to at all consider buying a house right now, could shuffle around a little if they had to, if there was a significant reason to do so. If there was a real threat, I'm pretty confident that we would be willing to pool our money and like live in the same place, which would immediately remove a significant amount of the problems for our day-to-day lives. The government self-destructing, no, I'm not going to be able to give you a solution to that. I mean, I'll note that it already is right now, even though this isn't happening. So like, I'm not sure that's really the defining problem here. I feel like it would be more the fleeting way to hold on to humanity. But you can see each other in person. You can communicate in meat space, if you will. So I do think it's worth considering that even in this, you have to be fair, relative doomsday scenario that we're suggesting, it's not like there would be nothing. You could do something relatively straightforward with your life. It would be annoying, but not out of reach to do. And it would be like okay, not good, but like not the end of humanity. You see what I mean? And more than that, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I think this isn't concerning. I'm not trying to say it that way. I just think it's useful to put that concern in a more useful selection method type of context, rather than the maniacally evil for no clear gain context that the kernel suggests. Again, I'm not saying that that's like stupid or disingenuous, but just that it's important to keep it in mind that it is pretty evil for not an incredibly clear gain unless you were really stupid or, again, motivated by some very broken government. And people already have that problem without AI going crazy. I also wanted to note that already we have a couple of examples of where it would be very difficult to make people unable to use current AI. There are some that, forgive my lack of knowledge on this subject, but like Stable Diffusion is something I understand people can download onto their personal computers and train on its own. So, I mean, already that can be used for much of the utility, whatever utility there is of AI, and in a way that it would be very difficult to make it not possible to use that way. Unless you make it physically impossible to have a computer that is not connected to the internet, not just hard, but like even a person who wants to somehow cannot have a computer like that, you really can't make people not able to use that technology in some form. Yes, it could be like annoying. And to be fair, I think the transcript kind of says this, that line about how you'll probably have access to it in some form, but it'll be weakened. You know, sure, even publicly, people will probably have it, but it will just be limited somehow. But the idea that people who set their mind to it wouldn't be able to use unrestricted versions of this technology would suggest that we somehow live in such a dystopia that you cannot buy computer parts. You see what I mean? That just isn't that possible. That it is possible, unfortunately, but you know, again, I don't know if this helps anyone. I hope it does. And I hope it's at least an interesting perspective, my earlier part, the first half, about having a sort of selection method being the sort of thing everyone is being asked to do. But I'll summarize the parlay a little bit. Part 1. I think that humans in their current state are basically just being forced through a sort of yellow light progress check. If you haven't already figured out that you need your own value system by now, we're calling time. Now there are significant consequences to not having one. You need to think about it yourself. That has its problems, as I constantly insist in every parlay where we bring this up. It's hard to have time to think about that for yourself, but if people are doom scrolling, I would at least encourage you, you do have time. You could spend that time doing it. So you can do it. Everyone can do it. People are very capable. They are already doing it, as far as I can tell. If I can do it, you can definitely do it. An unfocused scatterbrain like me being able to do it, you can definitely do it. And that is the check that is occurring here. To suggest that it would be needed to impose a kind of baseline selection method again misunderstands the problem. If you want to impose one of your own to create a totalitarian regime, well, I guess you could do that. But a lot of people, the cat is out of the bag. They've noticed that they would value their own selection method, and the government giving them one isn't going to make them forget that that would be valuable. for a lot of people, yeah, I mean, they will have no choice but to value the things they're directed to because unfortunately they're not being given the time to think the great thoughts they would have if they were. But for a lot of people, you're not going to be able to put that cat back in the bag. Like they know that now. So that's my part one. And part two, that it's useful to consider the bad things that could come of generative AI and, government regulation of it. Cryptographically signing things could be a very useful technology, but there's also a lot of concerns about how it would be imposed or integrated into social life and professional society. But I do think it's still important to keep that information in the context of how, again, malevolent you would have to be to do a lot of these things, how not motivated by personal interest, how wanting people to be worse off for no personal gain you would need to be to do a lot of these things. That's all. And how bad it would have to be, how evil of a world, rather than just misguided, which is the world I think we live in, you would have to live in for a lot of these things to come about. So it's very good to be vigilant, but I think for a lot of you, you already thought of this kind of stuff. So I think it's more useful to suggest, well, but it's not like the world is ending right now. And a lot of these problems actually exist without AI here. They have existed all along, really, and it just makes them more visible. So I hope that's at least an interesting perspective on these subjects. Looking forward to the next one, PistilWhip. You've been really popping off with these. Or again, maybe we're just on a similar wavelength or something, but like they've been very. I had just watched a video about a podcaster I was checking out had a video where they were accused of being AI, and then they, I think, very cleverly responded to that by making a video called "I Try to Prove I'm Not AI," where they got into some of the cryptographic signing technology, which I had been cursorily aware of, but it came at a very good time. So I was just very amused that the next parlay in my list, it wasn't submitted that recently. We're still very quickly, but catching up on a backlog, was about that same topic. Very cool. Looking forward to the next one. And folks, if you'd like to join PistilWhip, I and the rest of the Parley crew making Parley like this, you can submit whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a whole long thing if you don't want it to be, or it can be even longer. I'll try to find time to respond. You can do that using a link in the description for money every month supporting the channel. I'm happy to make one of these and spend some of my mental resources on your extremely interesting, most of the time unbelievably well timed thoughts. Looking forward to it if you're interested in that. See you in the next. See you in the next one.